Good evening, everyone. My name is Dre Patamonte. I'm a student here at the George Washington University, and I'm incredibly honored and excited to be here, a part of this evening's program hosted by Patagonia, Spitfire Strategies, Hip Hop Caucus, the School of Media and Public Affairs, and Planet Forward to discuss Tools to Save Our Planet, a Changemakers Guidebook. This essential guidebook is composed of stories, strategies, and solutions from over 50 climate activists, conservationists, and sustainability leaders from around the world. We're in Washington, for those who don't know, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the relentless attacks on climate resilience efforts, environmental organizations over the past few months. We've witnessed dramatic funding cuts, job losses, the censorship of vital climate language, and executive order after executive order repeating three unfortunate words: drill, baby, drill. And yet, while we gather here to speak about ideas and foster conversations, we must also remember the resilient legacies, courageous actions, and hard-won lessons from communities on the front line of climate catastrophe. Tonight, for those joining us via our YouTube live stream and for those here at SMPA's fifth floor studio, we hope to do just that. I am honored to be here with Miss Kristen Grimm, Coralie Kenna, and Reverend Lennox Yearwood, to have this conversation. So we're first going to start off with a couple words from Patagonia founder Yvonne Chouinard.
Yay.
We now have over 50 years experience supporting the grassroots environmental movement. And while we are proud of how far we've come as a funder, collaborator, and co-conspirator for these scrappy and focused organizations, we understand that the world has changed in untold ways since we started this journey. As business educator and coach Marshall Goldsmith said, "What got you here won't get you there." We know that the strategies and leaders that got us to this point are not the ones who will lead us through our current unfolding crisis. Heck, that goes for me too. The world we now know occupies, thinks, acts, and looks vastly different than it did 40, 20, or even 10 years ago. The pace of change is so dizzying. How could we expect to use the same playbook to solve the problems of tomorrow? We need to double down on the successful strategies of the past, while also building in new approaches. We also know that this is hard and often thankless work. If you've picked up this book, you are already motivated and inspired to effect change. That's great, but it isn't nearly enough. The crises before us demand that we take this work dead seriously. The contributors to this book are working tirelessly for a wide variety of causes, from banning open net pen fish farms to protecting our right to vote. They are successful because they do the work, day in and day out, that needs to be done, like any business. They write and rewrite vision and mission statements, create campaigns, raise funds, and take legal action. They celebrate their successes and recalibrate after a setback. They keep at it day after day, knowing that one day they will succeed. Maybe not how they originally envisioned, but in some way. In these pages, you'll find the best practices and tricks of the trade from those on the front lines, fighting for the planet and for thriving communities. Learning from and being inspired by them is the best way I know to gain momentum in this fight for our lives. Thank you and good luck.
Beautiful. Little wise and beautiful words. And one thing I want us all to keep in mind during this conversation is in the title of the book, it says our home planet. So we're all in this together. So I want to introduce our lovely three guests here. Why don't we start by just giving a few introductory words about yourself and answering this question. What is giving you hope lately when it comes to environmental protection? Can we start with you, Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen. I founded Spitfire Strategies, and we exist to advance racial, economic, and social justice and protect the environment. And it actually gives me a lot of hope. I see people out there all the time who know what actually matters to their community. And they don't buy into this idea that there's nothing we can do. And I see people launching campaigns all the time. I see them posting on social media. I see them taking over in viral ways and changing how we think about things. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, is people understanding people power is the most powerful force on earth.
For you, Coralie?
Hey everybody, I'm Coralie Kenna. I'm the Chief Impact and Communications Officer at Patagonia. And what gives me hope, I'm going to name 3 things. First, all of you for being here, because it indicates that you want to be a change maker, and that's amazing. We need more of you. The second is everybody who contributed to this book. It's an incredible book. Encourage you to read it, and it does give you the tools to save our home, our communities. And then the last is a stat I learned just last week about the Patagonia activist community. So we track all of you who take actions with us, mostly through our platform Action Works. And this year, just since January, the number of super activists, so people who have taken at least 2 actions, has more than doubled, which is pretty remarkable. People understand what's going on and they want to take action. That gives me hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and the Hip Hop Caucus to be here. I am Rev Yearwood. I'm the president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. Hip Hop Caucus has just turned 20. We turned 21 years.
Wow.
This year. Thank you on that. Means I guess we can drink now. Not that they've been drinking for a long time in the Hip Hop Caucus, so I don't know. What gives me hope? It's a tough question, which I thank you for asking that question, because the easy answer would just to be list off a number of things that make you feel good, and that's important. But the reality is that it's a combination of that. Reminded of the words of Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks said that the rage of the oppressed is not the same as the rage of the privileged. And so hope actually means different things to those who have privilege and those who are oppressed. So for me, I am from a place called Cancer Alley. And Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch of land between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. I was born right outside of that. And it's called that because most of the people in that community are dying because of cancer. And they're dying horrible deaths because they're putting petrochemical facilities in those communities, as well as other toxins. And they look at it because most of it is black, brown, poor people, so they feel it's an easy place to just put these facilities. But this also marks the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. So while we have Cancer Alley, and then you have folks who are literally dying for that, you also have a situation where you have these storms that you would hope that people would have learned from that. So with that being a backdrop to your question, the thing that gives me hope is that people are not hopeless. Mm-hmm. That people are still writing these books. People are still gathering here. People are still coming together to find solutions. And we'll get more into that in our conversation, but that to me gives me hope, because then it means that we at Hip Hop Caucus, and even me personally, it means that I'm not alone.
I truly love what you just said about hope meaning different things, and I'm thinking about what this book can and what I know this book will do, and that's spark change. So I wanted to start off by asking Coralie, why did Patagonia decide to publish this book? What is it hoping to spark? Who is it hoping to spark?
Yeah, thank you for that. So you heard our founder at the beginning, and he says it well. You can read it in the foreword too. But Patagonia has been supporting grassroots environmental activists for almost the entire time we've been in business, so for over 50 years. And we have gravitated to local organizers who know their communities best. They know what the challenges are in these smaller groups, because they do spark bigger change to solve these really complicated problems in their local communities. And we have learned so much about environmental issues from them. We would really be nowhere without them. And so this is part of our we want to spark that change, and we want to do it through local grassroots organizing and activists, because we know bigger things can happen when we focus on that and give that the attention it needs. The other foreword in this book was written by my colleague Nick, who says, F this, I am done. And I think the other thing to keep in mind in reading this book is now is not the time to say, F this, I am done. Now is the time to say, let's take this on and move forward.
Well, there are many times where I want to say F this. I'm done. I think a lot of people in the room agree, but I agree with you. Kristen, you wrote one of the chapters in the book, and you point out that as people become more alarmed about climate issues, there are still some who aren't necessarily acting on it. So can you say more about this and how we can even get them to act?
Yeah, I think the thing to understand about communications is it's really about meaning making. And I think we don't always understand that. We think of communication as one way, like I know something and I'm going to tell you and then you're going to go do something. And you know, that never works, by the way. So, but what it can do is you do have the opportunity with communication to tell people, this is what this means. And you get to actually define for people like, this is what's happening. And this is why it's a problem, or even why it's an opportunity. And here's who's responsible. Not only who made this happen, if they're to blame, but also who's actually responsible for solving it. Mm-hmm. And I think that we all have that power. And one of the greatest things I find about the internet and other things is actually suddenly who gets to do meaning making really expanded. And that's a gift. That's a gift we can all take care of. And so I think we need to do that. And I think some people shortchange things like, I'm going to say straws. Yeah, straws. I know, I'm wading right into the culture wars. I'm like, let's go after straws. So yeah, I am. So straws to me though is really important because straws is where you start to get somebody to actually understand like, hey, your decision in this restaurant, in this moment actually matters. And sometimes people are like, that's not enough. That's not going to solve climate change. Like, okay, easy killer. So
Turtle killer.
Easy turtle killer. But actually what it does is it makes somebody stop and think about their decisions actually matter. And when they start to think about it from a straw perspective, they might start to think about it somewhere else. So guess what? Someone doesn't immediately wake up having never thought about the environment and is like, I'm going to go buy an $80,000 EV. Like, that's not how that works. But they do start with straws. And then they start to expect that their restaurants don't actually do killer turtle straw things, right? And so suddenly like they start to connect like, oh, and as a society we can do things. And so I consider these like gateways to actual environmental activations that make people more willing to take bigger things. And the last thing that it starts to do is it really does the most important thing, which is shifts mindsets. And we start to question these civic bargains that people tell us we have to make. I got activated around the big forest fights where they told us it was jobs versus owls. And you're like, oh, who's gonna win? But here's the thing, it was never jobs versus owls. In fact, to have timber jobs, you have to have really well-managed forests. That's actually the deal. So there's not all of one or the other. So the question is right now during these times of great change, can we look at some of these civic bargains and say, I'm not signing up for that one anymore, I think there's a better one. I think we can actually have communities that all have clean water. I think we have the technology to make that happen, and I think we just need the will. So I'm not willing to say, oh, some can't have water or some can't have clean water. I'm not willing to accept that anymore. And I think that's what activates people, is to realize like, you don't actually have to accept that. You can challenge it and make the change.
Rev Yearwood, is there a moment that sparked that change in you to want to do better for the environment personally? I know you gave the example of forest fires and owls, but I know we all probably have that personal drive within us as well.
Yeah, no, well for me it's 100%, it's Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
Hurricane Katrina, which now this year on August 29th, it would be 20 years. Makes a lot of people feel very old when they think about that. It's older than probably most of the students here at GW, actually. And that's important because that's actually a time when the fossil fuel industry started to use the term climate denial. They saw people responded when they saw particularly black and brown and poor white people on the streets of New Orleans. And they saw that it was tugging at our heartstrings. And in that moment, they begin to think, okay, like they have done as with other things, they have lied about the science, knowing what the science could be, and many other things. So instead, what happened there is that they saw, okay, we have to let's do climate denial and put that out there into the universe. And then from climate denial, then okay, let's do climate delay, because people then, oh, we're really in a climate crisis. And they did climate delay. And so, yeah, Hurricane Katrina sparked, and I've been, in this climate, dealing with this from my own perspective from Louisiana, but also from a standpoint of climate crisis, What's interesting, though, in that is that there's no doubt that we're in a climate crisis. There's no doubt what my community continues to go through because of fossil fuels. There's no doubt what people are going through, what they went through last year in Phoenix, Arizona, with over 200 plus days of 100-degree weather. There's no doubt of what we saw early this year in Los Angeles with the wildfires. There's no doubt what we saw in Kentucky or Indiana or Ohio with the floods. There's no doubt what we're seeing in the UK with the floods or the heat in Australia. It's horrific to know that children in India, as young as 2 and 3 and 4, are literally drowning themselves in bucket to try to avoid the heat. There's no doubt that we're in the midst of a climate crisis. But I think that there's 2 other things happening, and I think we'll say with the communications. One, unfortunately, climate is no longer about science or data. Climate now is completely about culture. And unfortunately now, because it is culture, the climate movement that has been around for some time, even the conservation and environmental movement, does not know how to deal with culture issues. And on top of that, not only are we in the midst of a climate crisis, we're also in the midst of a crisis of imagination, in which this movement has no idea even how to talk about it, only through white paper energy and data and other kind of means. And so we're now in a tricky moment, which is what I was saying earlier, off camera, I guess, or off the stage, about the need for this book and why Patagonia, is because it's a time when actually we're going to need corporations to take on other corporations. And that's a deeper piece. Let me be very clear. I think that the climate movement as it also has its own culture. On the good part and bad part, when I think of the climate movement culture, I think immediately of Birkenstock, Patagonia, and Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which is good and bad. But also, that means that this movement has its own culture. And when you have your own culture that requires all of humanity to be a part of it, then that means that you then have to break your own culture as well. So on one hand, this book is, I'm so glad that Patagonia is doing, and this book is a fabulous read. I love pictures, so they're great pictures. But I think even more importantly, it shows, and I'm also, fun fact, I'm president of Hip Hop Caucus, I'm also a deadhead as well but in that process, so hang out, Grateful Dead lunch. But that's part of my link to the Ben & Jerry's crew. But in that, one of the great things to that is that I'm glad that at least for those entities, it's clear that they're ensuring they realize that those who are comfortable buying their merchandise and being in their world, that I'm so happy that these companies like Patagonia and even like Ben & Jerry's are saying that unless we have frontline and fence line communities, unless we have stories from people who are most impacted, then we can't solve this. If this only looks like people from Vermont and Pasadena, California, we're not going to win this. Right. And so this is why I really enjoy it. I'm so glad Patagonia is I hope they push themselves even further. And I'm glad Hip Hop Caucus is here. I think that's what's needed, because this is truly a situation where, unfortunately, your other corporate partners, their business plan means a death sentence for our communities.
And when we talk about our communities, we know that those on the front lines of climate change are Black folk, brown folk, those in the lower income bracket. Amidst all the attacks on DEI that we're seeing on a weekly basis, I wanted to ask each person in the panel, can environmental justice still be a thing? And if it is, how can organizations work on it safely and sustainably? Can I start with you, Kristen?
I mean, I think as long as there's environmental injustice, then there has to be environmental justice. Right. So it's not like somebody can just wave this away with an executive order. That's not how that that's not how that works. And who's going to tell him? I don't know, but somebody should tell him. But I do think we have to get really serious about being really aware of, like, the fact that we live in a nation where there's a cancer alley. And it's not like, oh, nobody knows about it. Like, everybody knows about it. And so really getting very serious that we're going to have to solve this. And I think that people are going to have to demand the solution. I do think that when you act like this is a back burner issue, they do put it away. I think climate denialism was horrible. I think climate delay is even worse, because it does make it sound like someday it's going to happen. And as they start to strip away right now data, real data, it gives me a lot of hope, though, that the truth is that we actually can get our own data. And we can actually start to really say what the impacts are and demand that they actually address them. And I do think that that's critically important, is that we don't back off this. If anything, I think if the government wants to step back and say, we're going to pretend this isn't happening, I think everybody else should just be like, great, I can cover that ground. I can cover that ground and make a lot of noise.
Corley?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it is still a thing. Environmental justice is still a thing. You put that really well. And to piggyback off of what you were saying, we have to center those that are most affected by this crisis in our advocacy in efforts to stop it. And if we don't, we're not gonna be successful. We also have to acknowledge climate affects all of us. Rich, poor, no matter what race, no matter what country you came from, whatever it is affecting all of us. It is affecting all the countries of the world. And people just need to wrap their head around that, and then we can move forward. Yeah, this crisis knows no limits and no bounds. And so centering people is what we have to do. As it happens, I think centering stories and people in this crisis will help us overcome some of the culture issues that are affecting it right now. And I think so long as we only think of climate as a weather thing, a scientific thing, so forth, and we aren't clear about what effects it's having on real people, real communities, then we aren't going to get anywhere.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that centering is also trusting.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things in our movement is that, you know, I also working around with folks in philanthropy, advising and talking to them. And one of the things that has come up, we did, the New School did a study in which they looked at how much money was given in 1 year, and from 12 foundations. And out of those 12 foundations, they gave out $1.3 billion to climate organizations. Out of that 1.3, only 1.3% went to EJ-led organizations. So the problem then goes, yes, we all know what EJ is. We always say that it's particularly Black, brown, indigenous people. But then we don't give them the resources. We then give that money to other people to then translate for them. And that then got exploited. So even people talk about this current administration, when the train derailment happened, when the frack gas from the Ohio River Valley was trucked down to Houston, turned into petrochemicals, and then trucked back up, it then was vinyl chloride, and then imploded and exploded in East Palestine, Ohio. Predominantly white community, wearing MAGA hats in the situation, but it imploded. The thing that also exposed, because that community was Americans. Doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, they're Americans. And they are now dealing with an environmental justice crisis. This movement didn't move. And I remember literally telling folks at that time in that administration, you need to go to East Palestine. They didn't. The guy who won went there. Now he went there throwing MAGA hats around. It was pretty awful, but listen, he went there and he exploited it. He said that they don't care about white people and all this stuff. Again, but if people had not been coined in how they think what EJ is, and they're not EJ from the standpoint of environmental justice, from the standpoint that they think that that's Black, brown people who are suffering only, and not poor white people who are suffering isolation, but also not East Palestine, Ohio, they would have been there. And so what I'm saying here is that we have to change our idea of even what environmental justice is. And part of that change is that how do we empower, particularly women of color, Black women, brown women, young people, queer people, to lead in this movement. And so that they are at the front line of this process. That's why I love this book, had a lot of folks in that conversation. But even more importantly than that, is not just trusting them and giving them resources, but even more importantly is the fact of the matter that we cannot leave them to suffer. Because with this book, why I love this book is that, unfortunately, a lot of the books that I read on climate are just a bound book of trauma porn, displaying the hurt of people. And if I want trauma porn, there's a lot of books on the shelf displaying how bad, how our demise, and clearly creating climate anxiety. But when you have a book that comes from people and has the experiences, love the new movie by Ryan Coogler, Sinners, that visualizes this in very great ways. But when it comes from that community, you don't got to then explain everything. Allow them to explain for themselves.
And I think, like you said, that's what this book brilliantly does, and it does it through the perspective of those community members and to people who have traveled to do stories and to do research and to not only be a part of their community, but I think immerse themselves and not tell the story for them, like you said, but allow them to tell the stories themselves.
Exactly.
Corley, since this book was released by Patagonia, what responsibilities do you think companies like Patagonia can have for educating their consumers more on ways that they can become active in these environmental issues?
Yeah. So we would be crazy to not think of our community as potential members of an army of people to save our home planet. We would be unnecessarily handicapping ourselves, slowing ourselves down, not using all the tools at our disposal to do this. And that's what this fight is going to take. So it would be nuts, in my opinion, not to encourage our community to show up and to take action. I think also for companies like Patagonia that make a thing, that make a product, we know we are leaving behind a pretty serious environmental footprint that somebody's going to have to clean up and deal with. And so we take very seriously this notion of how we can help our community, and hopefully they take these lessons when they make other purchases, to understand this is how this t-shirt was made. This is what the benefits of regenerative organic cotton are. This is where our carbon emissions come from. And it's really hard to reduce your carbon emissions, but we're committed to doing it. And here's how you can help us in that too. So, yes, we take the responsibility seriously, and we'd be crazy not to honor it.
What was I going to say? And when we're talking about that responsibility, do you think it's important for companies to still be able, especially like Patagonia, who they make clothing, they sell things for people who are going on backpacking trips and all that stuff. Do you think that accountability is essential and important there?
It is. I mean, our business literally depends on a healthy planet. And so, yes. But for other companies too, and there's lots of data that shows just how much people want more than a good product or a good service with the companies they engage with. They want to understand that those companies care about more than turning a profit. Companies that can do this the right way have the benefit of helping their communities, helping the planet, and helping their bottom line. So, yes.
And I think with the book, it does a really good job with communicating this. And for Kristen, what are some communication strategies you'd highlight for those wanting to protect the environment and address the climate crisis, knowing that we are in a really polarizing time?
We are in a really polarizing time, and I think you have to keep that top of mind when you're talking to people, is that everybody sort of is very skeptical of, what are you saying? Why are you saying it? What are you trying to get me to do? Like, what are you trying to manipulate me? And so you really have to get very focused on motivating people, which I think is really different than informing people. Because as we've watched, so over 70% of Americans do actually believe climate change is happening, so that's good. But a very low percent are actually taking any action to do anything about it. So as communicators, I stop and I think, like, well, what is that about? Like, you kind of know. So you can inform people and alarm them. And if you alarm people, you actually put them into what I call apocalyptic fatigue. I don't know if anybody else is suffering from that these days, but every day I wake up to find out I'm definitely going to die by some means, and a lot of it's environmental. So I kind of want to tune it out when I'm not alarmed, right? And sometimes too, we actually inform people, but we make them feel really helpless. Like there's nothing you can do about it. Like if you actually look into sea level rise, like it's already rising. It's going to rise for the next 100 years. Nothing you can do about it. Like, don't say that. Like, not that useful, actually. Like, sometimes the scientists can talk about the science stuff. So you really do have to think though, like what's actually going to make people to act. So things that make people act are like awe. So like when you go and you see something so unbelievably beautiful, you know, even like watching, I don't know if you've ever watched kids like do these like backyard gardens or like, you know, get the bees to come by. Like it is awesome. And like you leave like kids in the inner cities doing cool bee projects and you're like, I'm gonna save this place. Like I'm totally gonna save this place. So awe is really important. Agency is really important. We have got to remind people you can do stuff. You know, you can do things about this. You can hold your elected leaders actually responsible for doing this, and you can't let them off the hook. So don't make people feel helpless. Don't tell them how like changing their light bulb's never gonna help. Like that's not helpful, y'all. That's just not helpful. And we have to hold people accountable. I mean, going to the companies, listen, people are not so great necessarily at voting. They are great consumers. Have you ever seen a young woman at a Sephora counter when she feels like they have done her wrong? It is like, I'm like, could you just, I just need to bring you to Congress just for a day. So I'm just saying, like, take that consumer, whatever that is, we all have, where we're like, I'm gonna tell them how I feel about this, and actually bring it into the political realm. Because you do have a lot of ability to hold people accountable, and it's your life. Like, this is your life.
Do you think Gen Z helps with that a lot?
I think, listen, I am all hopeful about Gen Z. I feel like Gen Z people are like, Gen Z is really impatient. I like that. I like the idea that they're like, yeah, can you guys solve this yet? Like, let's get this going. Like, we've been talking about this for a while. Like, I'm ready for this action-oriented generation to be like, you know what? I know how to post, and I'm going to use that power for good. So I can't wait.
I think we're going to transition before our final questions to some Q&As from the audience. We're going to have the mics getting ready. Thank you. Just 1 second. Thank you. Well, while we're waiting for we have the mics ready. Perfect. We're going to take questions from the audience at this time. Please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll come around with a microphone.
So I'm actually really glad you brought up Gen Z, because I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what motivates us, especially that is divided by pre and post-COVID. But I think there is still something that unites us. And please, for the love of God, everybody, forgive me for saying this, but we do a lot of things for the meme. We do a lot of things for social capital, certainly, but also just because it's funny. And so I think that maybe this could be a potent way of responding to the apocalypse fatigue that you invoked. But also, I think that this presents a trap because we do also care a lot about authenticity. And it's kind of a high-risk, high-reward situation because of that. But I am wondering, not from your perspective as environmental activists, but from your perspective as communications professionals, do you see any value rather than, or perhaps in addition to leaning into hope, leaning into the meme?
It sounds like we're talking about humor in this context. Anyone want to answer that question first?
I feel like the Rev's got something. I feel like we're in culture here. You got to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no. Hip Hop Caucus loves we actually have we're creating a lot of things like this. So we actually have a documentary. We created a number of documentaries. One of our documentaries we created was called Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave. It's a comedy. And nobody laughed at the title. But okay.
H Mama's Heat Wave?
Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave.
Ain't Your Mama's.
I gotta make sure I get that right. One of our main people and our comms people are here. I see Jarrell's here, so I can't get it. He's like, you got it wrong. You got the wrong name. Everybody's Googling something that isn't Mama's Heat. You know, they know it's ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave. So we believe, actually, it's funny because we think in using. I want to get to I want to actually have a response to your question. I just want to say that, but there's a need in using comedy, and I think that particularly in Black and Brown communities. We're able to tell our stories from the worst pain and then make it funny. And so that actually helps people to understand the crisis that they're in. And so we did that. We have comedians talking about it. But to your point, I want to talk about Gen Z and then the ones after Gen Z. So let me say this, might be a little provocative, a little bit. we're not hearing from all of Gen Z. You're hearing from Gen Z, a lot of Gen Z in this generation, and this is heard for you, of those who are coming from a position where they actually can get the mic. This Gen Z sometimes is forgetting, as former generations, that a lot of times the Emmett Tills don't make it to become Gen Zs. Or the Fannie Lou Hamers are as important, that sometimes we need the genius outside the academy to be talking about these issues. And I think that's hurtful, because I like a lot of times, to your point, what it means is that then a lot of times I always tell young people, you're almost mimicking old people, and you're trying to do it in a different way. And that's not the genius we need from you. We need your genius that actually uses AI or AGI, whatever you want to use, or use your genius to connect in a way that you don't have all of the binders of black and white and brown. Your faith systems are different and more developed. So your faith systems isn't just about Christian or Jewish or Buddhist. You have a different faith system. You're more global citizens and how you're connected. You can literally be in Dubai tomorrow and then be back in California the next day. So you're different. Your parents and even some crazy billionaires are talking about going to Mars. But it's actually not too far off, actually. You can see things that we could not see. But you're talking like you're an 80-year-old. And you're talking about it and trying to make it funny and using music, but that isn't what's challenging. And so I would just say that in the midst of this crisis, the one thing that's probably most important for this generation of young people is that you have to fight for your future in a way that's very different. Our parents fought for equality, but you are now fighting for existence. That's very different. And you're in a position now where you're fighting against those who are more than willing to steer the Titanic into the iceberg. Not just see the iceberg, but literally aiming for the iceberg. So you have to do things radically different. And so I would say that the genius you need now, I would hope that you leave the walls of your universities, this amazing university here, George Washington University, others here in the city, all around this country. I would really hope you would realize that the moment that you are born in is something that is very odd and different. It's even more peculiar than the odd generations of those who fought for me to be sitting here to overcome slavery, those who fought for me and others so we can have women up here talking and powerfully, those who can fight for folks to just marry who they want to marry. I don't actually know why. I don't know why anybody wants to get married, but if you want to get married, then you can marry who you want to marry. But your generation is now in a very unique position. You're fighting for existence. I'll end with this. This couple of days ago was the anniversary of Paul Revere's ride, his midnight ride, and obviously the poem for that. If it wasn't for the poem, we wouldn't know who Paul Revere is. It actually wasn't even in Paul Revere's obituary that he actually even did a ride. And we know that he didn't do it by himself, and actually he didn't even make it, all that kind of stuff with Paul Revere. But it's the 250th anniversary of that amazing push. And we now know that that push came out of policy. So either you shape policy shapes you. It was about taxation. You see here in Washington, taxation without representation. That was the core of that. And this issue that we're talking about climate crisis is around policy too. The difference though is that back then it was British versus British, French versus French, and different people against one another who actually were related. That created the American Revolutionary War. Where we are now is no longer about man versus man. It's man versus trees, man versus tiger, man versus the seas. No longer is it this, are they coming by the sea or coming by land? No, it's literally, is the land on fire or the sea rising? So the difference for your generation is that you're no longer looking for an American revolutionary war. You're in the midst of an American solutionary war. Can you put forth the best solutions to help humanity? And if your generation can solve that and be solutionary, then literally 250 years from now, which would be April 28th, 2275, which would be a Wednesday. I'm not sure why I know that. But that generation will thank you, not for your memes, not for your TikTok, but simply because you laid it all on the line to fight the climate crisis. And if they have clean air and clean water, and humans still exist, they will tell your generation, thank you.
Thank you. Another question from the audience.
Hi, I am a CXG at the DC store up the street. I'm also a 9th gen Washingtonian, so I am very aware of this area. I grew up in Ward 8, which is a very low income, mostly African American neighborhood. So I am hyper aware of the current situation that we are in. I have personally found a lot of what is wrong with our current climate crisis everything goes back to slavery. It always goes back to slavery. But racism via infrastructure, segregation via infrastructure has made a huge part. My neighborhood, we are in a food desert, and we can hardly leave the neighborhood because our neighborhood is segregated us from the rest of the city due to like 3 parkways. So if you don't know the bus, if you don't know the train, if you don't even know about the rest of the resources in the city, you're just kind of trapped. So my question is, how can we as a company use our resources in order to directly deliver these resources to the people who aren't even aware because they already don't have the resources to even find out about the things we do? Georgetown is a very affluent, rich neighborhood. So a lot of the community events draw these affluent, rich people and not the people who actually need the knowledge.
Maybe we can start with you,
Yeah,
Coralie.
I'll start. I mean, I think one tip, which the Rev Yearwood shared earlier, is we shouldn't expect your neighborhood to come to Georgetown to learn from us. We should be going to your neighborhood to learn from you, build that trust, and then work to figure out how can we support you in the solutions your community needs. I think it will just create the bad cycle that we're in if we Patagonia Georgetown have an expectation that everybody's going to always come to us. That's just not how it works. Sometimes this takes really creative solutions. I do agree to the last question, like we need more humor in some of this, even though these are dark and deadly situations that a lot of these communities are facing. But in this time of a lot of really horrible things happening, humor can be like a way to break through and get people to relate to one another, remind people of our humanity. And I think it's also about just making sure that in addition to being inclusive about the communities we involve, going to the communities and building that trust, like let's think outside the box here. Let's take the strategies and best practices in this book and think, how do we turn all of this on its head and do it differently? Because I think we've gotten a little stuck in some tired ways, and it could benefit from young people contributing more, but all people contributing more to these solutions. But I don't know, I invite my other panelists to think about and respond to that.
I'll just add that we have another documentary that we did called Underwater Projects. Running comment. I'm going to bring it up because it's narrated by Wanda Sykes, who is amazing. Yeah. And so hopefully you can all check that out. I think it's still it's not longer in the film run, but hopefully maybe Hip Hop Caucus work with Patagonia to do some screenings around. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Your question is fantastic. you're right. It all does go back to certain aspects of exploitation. So spot on in that, and it's about not loving. I would add one caveat to a word you said, and this actually may help to answer your question. You mentioned food deserts. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because deserts are actually natural, but scarcity is not. And what you're talking about actually is not natural. What happened in Ward 8 is intentional. Putting highways through that community, not allowing food is not natural. It was intentional to make sure that that community suffered. One of the saddest things I've ever been involved with, actually, was people not knowing that 65%, particularly black and brown people, live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And there was one right there, coal-fired power plant, that was in Southeast. There was a mom who lived there, and she had a number of kids, and try to make it a single mom. And her daughter had asthma, and not understanding about what particulate matter is and how small that is, and it just looks like a nice day, but not knowing how pollution works. She was just thinking that, okay, and this one daughter who had asthma was just one of those daughters who was like her second help, who would help take care of all the other kids, the younger ones, make sure the brothers were off the street. That was the one, but she had asthma. And this mother was making decisions about, can I afford an inhaler, or do I buy food? And so, because that's also the game, a Russian roulette that happens in Ward 8. And so she was playing that game, working, buying food, and then trying to get an inhaler, because health is a part of this conversation. She came home, and that beautiful little girl was in her living room floor, holding an empty inhaler, and had died. And the entire time that funeral for that baby was taking place, that mother was literally trying to get into the casket because her baby had died, and the pain of knowing that she didn't have the money to buy an inhaler to save that child in Southeast. That's also part of the climate crisis. That's also part of the pain. And that's also not natural, to be burying your baby. So I think that, to your question, that we're looking for a movement that doesn't share that pain all the time. They don't hear those stories about asthma, emphysema, and cancer. Polar bears are good, turtles are good, but humans are important, and particularly humans who are being directly impacted by policy. So your question is right. The question is this, is that if this movement ever decides to move from a spirit of charity to solidarity, we will stop electing fossil fuel presidents. That day is really up to us, because that means that we have to give up what we have. So I'm hopeful that groups like Patagonia and other companies, listen, I actually want Patagonia to sell tons and tons and tons and tons of boots and backpacks and all kind of stuff. But I also want them to use those resources to create change, because sometimes no cash, no cause, and we need to have money to do that. So I'm actually hopeful that folks who are watching this, we can have a real serious conversation, because my people are definitely dying because of this crisis.
Thank you for that question. I think we have time for one more from the audience.
Because of my questions evolved, because what you said, I co-found the Friends of
Sarah
Anacostia.
just has
I helped co-found the Friends of Anacostia Park. My name is Akima Price, and we use Anacostia Park. I do like nature-based social work.
Yeah.
So how do you create these? I call it restorative park engagement. So we're doing like court-mandated mental health in the parks, but I'm just offering out the thought of parks as these community resilience hubs, and not just places to exchange information about climate change. But you got people in survival mode, and that incredible resilience that they have been trying to survive for decades, right?
Yep.
And so the thought of flooding, although they're experiencing it more now and climate is starting to become a part of their, oh, okay, I get it now, but they're already in stress. And whether it's around food, safety, we use the park to help grieving moms who have lost their sons to gun violence. So there's a variety of things we do around like nature-based social work that I think is starting to help at least get people out of survival mode so they can join these conversations.
That's right.
And they can join the conversations not being hungry, not being illiterate, not being, in a depressed mode. Man, I think most of us are kind of dancing along that edge. But these folks have been suffering for so long, so I don't even really know what my question is, but just excited to dig into this and figure out, as a change maker on that level, how can I leverage the resources in this book to continue our work and continue to elevate the idea of using parks and green spaces for those type of not just meaningful but restorative that help them be healthier humans outside of the park, because our folks have been going through it forever. And I don't think it's the resilience we have. I feel incredibly hopeful because of what I'm seeing, and families just healing, and parents coming home feeling better about themselves and their ability to even educate their children and be a leader in their home life, let alone their community. So thank you for what you all are doing.
Thank you for that.
And I'll offer
profound
Anacostia
comment.
Park up
Yeah.
for a local partner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's a great. It's actually the opposite of what we were just hearing about too. Is I think so often when we talk about environment and the changes we have to make, we talk about it from a sacrifice frame. That things we're going to have to give up. And in fact, you're talking about things that we get. That when we have nature, in your case, here in the city, all the wonderful things that can happen in it that are very based on human and well-being. And I think that's one of the most important things for our movement to really get into, not only to be very human-centered, what are you going to get out of this, but this idea of the abundance that can come when we're in fact working with nature and not against it all the time.
Thank you for that. As we're closing up this evening's program, I want each of the panelists to leave the audience with a quick but thoughtful note. If you could leave everyone here with one action, principle, or mindset to carry forward after today, what would it be? Can we start with you, Rev?
Yeah. This is going to seem weird, but it's kind of fun. People may understand it, may not. I would challenge you, if you have not seen the movie Sinners. No, facts on that. A lot of y'all, I would encourage you to go see that movie. And there's a part of the movie that, particularly a lot of us who are in this movement, and I don't want to get, you got to see it. I'll say this part. For those who have seen it, like, yes, say that part, Rev. There's a part of the movie in which they're all in the juke joint. And then there's what we know in our community as someone who's a pastor, someone who looks like you, but is always in you, but they're black, because they have obviously black background, but they look like they're white. And so there's a scene there where that person goes outside because they think they can negotiate, and they leave the people inside. I would say this, and that leads to not give it away, a lot. So, but the reason I bring that up is that I hope that in this movement, before you leave the people who you're around in Anacostia or in Louisiana, trust our genius. Trust our genius. Don't go outside and talk to those on your own, on our behalf. Talk to us and allow for us to find solutions either with you or find solutions. We cannot take you continuing to talk for our people. So I love this book, because this book, there's many people who I know, some dear friends who are in this book, so why you should read it. But talk to us, trust our joy, trust our swag, trust our love, our sex appeal, trust our music, our food, trust us, trust how we move, trust us. And I'm telling you, if that trust is there, not just to go to Anacostia or Cancer Rally, but you'll see a change if you trust those who are most impacted by this crisis. Yes.
We can pass it over here to Kristen.
It's funny because I work a lot with leaders, like when I get to go work with Patagonia and go to the tools. And what I would say is, this world is full of leaders who have brilliant things going on. Like, I just listened to Akima talk, and it's like, go join forces with a leader already moving. Like, you don't have to go start your own thing. These leaders need you. Everybody's so focused on being the rock that gets thrown in the middle of the pond. Like, go be one of the ripples. Like that's actually what gets us where we need to go. So I say go find your Akimas and get behind them.
Corley?
I will say the other side, and by the other side, I mean those that don't love clean air and clean water and land. That side will get away with what they're doing unless we speak up and do something. And so it is on all of us to do something. And one great way to do that is to use our ActionWorks platform. We have this QR code here. And this platform is all about connecting our community, all of you, with the groups that we support through our 1% for the Planet program. And so you can look up by issue area or your zip code, whatever your thing is, and we will get you connected with those groups. It's an easy way to get involved. We have small actions and big actions, but join us. We'd love to have you. The water's warm.
Well, thank you to each and every one of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks to those who encouraged me to be up here today. Thanks to my family. Love y'all. Thank you to Jack and Sarah and our student staff here. And thank you to everyone joining us via live stream. Please feel free to stick around a little bit afterwards and listen, be caring, and be radical. Thank you.